You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, my name's Helen Mackenzie and today is Friday, May 23rd, 2025.
6.
I've been thinking a lot this week about how we plan and how we actually move from intention to action. I've been using the natural planning model from the Getting Things Done methodology to map out some of my own projects, everything from setting up a new office space to planning my content cadence. With a little help from ChatGPT, it's been an eye-opener. The model is simple but powerful. Define your purpose, envision success, brainstorm ideas, organise them, and identify your next actions. That's it. But when you apply intentionally, it brings real clarity. And it's not just for personal to-dos, it works brilliantly for the big, messy, complex things in procurement too. If you're tackling a new sourcing strategy, a transformation plan, or prepping for a major supplier negotiation this week, try walking through it with those 5 steps. You'll be surprised how quickly the fog lifts.
5.
Procurement leaders often talk about the desire to move from output-based contracts to outcome-based agreements. But is that transition actually happening in reality? For many teams, the answer is no. So, what's preventing these more strategic contract structures from becoming the norm? Amy Fong, partner at Everest Group, has analysed thousands of real contracts across the business services landscape and has discovered a significant gap between what procurement teams aspire to do and what actually gets executed when it comes to contracts. In a recent Art of Procurement podcast episode, Philip Ideson spoke with Amy about this disconnect. Let's take a listen in as Amy explains how outcome-based contracts remain elusive despite nearly universal agreement about their value.
Do you feel that there's a trend, therefore, to go from, buying outputs, we buy transactions or we buy people, versus what are the outcomes that they're driving? So you don't necessarily care about how they deliver, but what the outcomes they deliver have a certain monetary value that you're willing to pay a certain amount of money for. And you're kind of doing that exchange rather than an output. Do you see moves towards that kind of contract structure?
Definitely. Yeah. So we've been talking about outcome-based contracts for a while now, and everybody theoretically agrees, right? So just to put some definitions out there for the audience, you kind of have your input-based contracts that might be time and materials. You might have output-based contracts that are kind of like, per invoice handling in P2P, right? Or per call in contact center, or per team or whatever that might be, or per story point.
Yeah.
So, if you're doing an agile contract, you might have per story point type pricing, right? And those kind of more input output based models become pretty ubiquitous. You also have managed services where you're just like handle this scope of work and get it done. And that's a little bit less hands-on. Great reasons. There's places you should use each of those. There's lots of different contract constructs. When we talk about outcome-based, it's really looking at the business results. It's a step removed from that. And that can make sense in some places if you're looking at contact center and you're looking at like customer sat, CSAT type metrics, right? You can kind of agree on a baseline. When you get to other areas, everybody agrees this is something we want. It's really hard to implement it. So when I've looked at some of the data we've seen when we look at contract negotiations, again, we're looking at like thousands of contracts. We see 95% of RFPs are, make this outcome-based or include some outcome-based metrics. Mm-hmm. In the end, it's something like 4 to 5% that actually end up with it.
4.
There's a truth about procurement that no matter how much time goes by or how things change, no matter what happens in the markets, or no matter what happens with technology or AI, procurement was and is at its core about people. This is exactly what Dr. Cindy Burkett, Vice President of Procurement for Specialty Dental Brands, talked with Kelly Barner about in a recent episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. What really resonated for me was Dr. Burkett's take on supplier relationships. Sometimes we might worry that getting too close to suppliers might actually compromise our negotiating power or leverage. But Dr. Burkett makes a compelling case for why that's not true, and that strong supplier relationships are incredibly beneficial for the business. She also shared something that I think everyone can relate to, which is how teams can turn their mistakes into learning opportunities instead of exercises in finger pointing. It's a good reminder for all of us. I also especially loved her insights on how to tackle tricky situations where the business might think a supplier is underperforming when, in reality, they might be adding tremendous value that's just misunderstood or overlooked. It's that kind of relationship navigation and communication back to the business that separates good procurement from great procurement.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot since Catalyst LA earlier this month, Art Procurement's first ever in-person event, is disruption. The energy and collaboration throughout the event was really incredible, and what struck me most was how many procurement leaders are no longer just talking about or worrying about disruption, especially disruption because of AI. They're actively preparing for it. The most impressive teams I've spoken to have moved beyond the if it happens mindset to the when it happens. They're doing things like embedding agility and adaptability into their processes and team cultures now. They're getting more sophisticated in their AI use cases, like using AI to spot supply risks before they happen. And they're building even deeper, more transparent relationships with suppliers so they can pivot quickly if needed. All these teams understand that staying ahead of disruption isn't just about survival, it's about turning chaos and uncertainty into strategic advantage. The question isn't whether disruption is coming. We know that it is. In many cases, disruption's in our midst right now. But the best teams know how to best position themselves before they're thrown off kilter by change or instability.
2.
This week, I came across an interesting case study in procurement strategy playing out in real time. Clorox, the bleach brand, just announced that they're considering changing their sourcing and possibly even their product formulations to offset a substantial $100 million tariff impact they're facing in the next fiscal year. What really got my attention, aside from that massive tariff amount, is how their approach to dealing with it contrasts with many of their competitors. For example, P&G is taking more of a wait-and-see approach to tariffs before they make any drastic supply chain changes, but clearly Clorox is being much more proactive. In fact, their CFO said that although Clorox is somewhat insulated from tariffs because they manufacture so close to where they sell, they're still actively exploring alternative sourcing rather than sitting back and waiting for more clarity on tariff policies. It's also interesting that both Clorox and their retail partners are intentionally holding excess inventory across their supply chain to buffer against more potential disruptions. It points to a more considered approach to risk, one that goes beyond just immediate challenges with tariffs. This is procurement strategy in action. They're balancing immediate need to protect margins against more long-term implications of making supply chain changes. It's a delicate dance that most of us are familiar with and worth watching as it unfolds.
1.
When you see a headline about the latest global disruption, do you feel a knot in your stomach? Or do you spot an opportunity? The way we feel about chaos plays a huge part in determining how effective our procurement strategies can be right now. In an upcoming AOP Live session, we'll talk to Adam Collins from ESCA, who will explain why turbulent markets are actually perfect conditions for procurement to demonstrate their value and strategic impact. What I love about Adam's approach is that he's not suggesting procurement needs to reinvent the wheel here. Most of the strategies that can help us navigate chaos and disruption are familiar approaches that have delivered for us in the past. They just need bold procurement leaders who are willing to dust them off and put them back into action. He'll also explain how creating healthy competition amongst suppliers can drive savings and value creation in unpredictable markets, as well as practical ways procurement can use levers like price discovery and contract audits to elevate procurement's impact in times of chaos. Because within all this chaos, there's opportunity, if only you know where to look.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.